So thanks for joining me here. It's not lost on me. It's 3 o'clock Friday. We're in Austin, sun's out. So 2 things. I'm not discussing AI, and this presentation, unless there's a bunch of questions, should only take about 20 minutes, so we can be on our way. So with that, I thought I'd start with a fun picture here, just a fun day at the beach. I was obviously explaining, this is Cape Tribulation, Queensland, Australia. If you ever have an opportunity to go to Australia, I highly recommend it. It's just north of an area called Cairns, which is where the Great Barrier Reef is. So you can do the Great Barrier Reef, do this, Daintree National Forest. And what I really want to draw your attention to are the families and the kids playing on the beach here. And I think this is a good metaphor for some of what we're going to be talking about today around cybersecurity risk management and essentially the funding of cybersecurity in large organizations and businesses. On this beach, there are crocodiles. And so if anyone's a fan of the late Steve Irwin and the Crocodile Hunter, they're really big crocodiles. And I think this is just a great metaphor for what businesses and organizations have to deal with when they deal with cybersecurity risk. So, and if you're a parent, having your kids on the edge of the water, knowing there's crocodiles in there, I think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting that apparently sharks don't rise to the occasion. So, give you a sense of probably how risky it is to be near the water. Okay, so today's topic, the most dangerous metric in cybersecurity. So it's usually around start of the fall season. So we're a management consultancy. So a lot of my clients, I work with CISOs, senior leadership in the cybersecurity organization. So as they're starting to go through the budgeting process, so they'll come to us and say, hey, I'm getting pressed by finance senior leadership to justify some of my spending requests based on any industry benchmarks. So benchmarks from peers, from competitors, from the market as a whole. And so, as you might imagine, finance teams, leadership want to know, hey, how are we doing against them? Are we spending a lot more? Are we spending a lot less? Should we peg to that? So there's a lot of issues with those metrics, and that's what I want to walk you through today. So before I do that, and I apologize, it's a little bit of a busy slide, but what we've observed is this familiar investment pattern. So if anybody's familiar with, general kind of cybersecurity maturity analysis, most organizations, they'll tackle compliance first. So make sure that they are meeting their legal and regulatory obligations. They'll get into traditional, okay, let's start to increase our maturity. So let's scale our capabilities across the organization, across the protect surface. And then if you get really good at it, you may do risk-based and then resilience-based. So I'll draw your attention to the red line, because this is often what we see. So, once an organization have a base set of capabilities, it's all about trying to scale. And it's expensive to scale. And so when you start to make your business case to leadership within the organization and asking them to make hard trade-offs between, say, investing in a new product, expanding to new markets, or spending more money on cybersecurity, you tend to get a lot of resistance, and the curve pushes out, and then they get hit. And so obviously, I think cybersecurity leadership, they're always pushing to move that back in, to accelerate up the maturity curve as quickly as possible. But the reality is it tends to get pushed out. And then you get hit twice, because you get a breach, you then have penalties, you have recovery costs, legal fees, and then depending on the type of breach, perhaps disruption of the business. So that gets counted into that as well. So familiar investment pattern, as you might imagine, familiar outcome. So here's a couple stats. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with with IBM's cost of data breach report. So we're seeing, a steady increase in breaches year over year. We're seeing the cost of breaches go up. Now, interestingly enough, cost of breaches, let's call it 5 million. So I think that understates in a lot of ways what companies really experience when they get hit big. Cited a few examples here, Equifax, Anthem, T-Mobile. I mean, these are hits in the hundreds of millions. The survey goes on to talk about participants expect security investment to increase after a breach. So despite the increasing risk, despite crocodiles in the water, organizations tend to still lean reactive. So they wait to move up the maturity curve. Okay, coming back to the most dangerous metric, perhaps it's a little bit hyperbolic. So if you want to know how much you should spend, so a lot of times a metric that's used is percent of IT spend. Oftentimes percent of IT spend is off of revenue of the organization. And here are some publicly available statistics. Clients ask us, hey, do you have any spend benchmarks? Here you go. So somewhere between 4% and 17%. On the surface, doesn't seem that dangerous. However, what we've observed is that it's not uncommon to use those spend benchmarks to cap security spend, even when you know you have major capability gaps. And that's where this particular metric becomes dangerous. And I'll talk a little bit where it becomes dangerous, and then obviously is what's dangerous about that. If other organizations are spending within those thresholds, well, following the pack does not appear to be working. So as is evidence in the news we read every day. So we read about almost a major breach. I just took these two this morning. Looks like Toys R Us got hit in Canada. And then, kind of really crazy story, all the NBA stuff. Looks like part of it was some sort of gambling hack where they hacked the card readers.
Yeah, just got arrested yesterday.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's everywhere.
The Jaguar numbers over in UK, I think they hit $1 billion.
Really?
Economic impact to the United Kingdom.
Wow.
That one's going to blow the data breach report out when we redo it this year.
Okay, yeah, well, and so interestingly enough, again, just kind of going back to the general theme here is using those benchmarks. And again, this isn't the most exciting topic in the world, but at the end of the day, if you need money to secure your organization, this is what we're up against. Okay, so I'll walk through a handful of reasons why we really don't like these metrics. So the first one is just reservations about the source and methods for getting the benchmarks. So first, they're generally in short supply. So I think I had 8 sources there over like the last 7 or 8 years. And they're from the big consultancies, BCG, PwC, et cetera. The metric varies widely. So 4% versus 17%, if your cybersecurity budget's 50 million or 100 million, it's a big swing in terms of, or if your IT budget is, it's a big swing in terms of what you're gonna be able to fund. And then it's this third one here, there's just no industry standard. So how this is calculated is up to anybody's choice. And what we see is at the top level, some do it as a percentage of IT budget. So some will calculate against maybe it's butts and seats, maybe it's number of endpoints, maybe it's because you outsource a lot of your cybersecurity to an MSSP. And then other cases, and I think this starts to get probably more directionally correct. If you look across the entire business, so it's not just IT, so there's a large tech stack throughout the organization. So probably better to start there. So second, the method for calculating are complex and inconsistent. And a big part of that is cybersecurity is a shared operating model. So blurry lines between the organization InfoSec, cybersecurity, and then the rest of the business that also has a responsibility for security. So I think one of the easier examples is identity and access management. So in some clients we work for, identity and access management sits within IT. So is the cost associated with that getting calculated into these numbers? Probably not. So likewise, sometimes IAM is in the security organization, and so maybe it's getting counted there, and then at other times, it's kind of split across cybersecurity and IT. So another good example of, with no industry standard on how to calculate these metrics, we don't know what's in or out of those cost numbers. I think this is a big one. So cybersecurity organizations, generally, at least of what I observed, so they're identifying a lot of vulnerabilities, they're running their scanners, doing code scanning, and then they're throwing it over over the fence to their buddies in product, applications. And the time that they have to spend fixing all of those vulnerabilities is considerable, right? Especially because security is asking them to put more and more story points in their development cycle to fix vulnerabilities that they find. Likely excluded from the cost of security. And then an easy example is security and awareness training. So if we just say, on an annual basis, maybe an employee's taking an hour's worth of security training, doesn't sound like a lot, but if you got 100,000 employees, that adds up fast in terms of cost. So that's probably not included in the benchmarks either. So again, all of this makes those benchmarks somewhat dubious. Then the third is the benchmarks, and then essentially how they're used leave more questions than answers. And I'll just read these. So some of the questions that we ask ourselves is, to what extent does more investment impact cybersecurity risk reduction? So we presented earlier a number of 4% to 17%. Well, let's say an organization is really serious about moving up that maturity curve, scaling their capabilities. Well, what if they're like, hey, we're going to put 20% or 25%? There's no good data out there that actually says that's the right number. That's really going to help you reduce security risk. Did organizations that spent materially higher than the average avoid major breaches throughout the increased spend period? Again, there's not good data out there that tells us that. Third one, do you have to continue to increase your spend year over year in perpetuity to stop advanced attackers? So if you think about a lot of organizations, when they're moving up that maturity curve, they have to spend a lot on implementation, and then reasonably, I think business leadership would say, hey, after you're done implementing all your security stuff, does it level out? Do you start to get that tail on the curve that comes down? Not a lot of good data that says that, but the theory pushes the organization to say, hey, we're going to start cutting costs at some point, or at least flattening, because, hey, you're going to get better at optimizing. You're going to use all this fancy automation. I don't think that's true, right? So the adversary continues to adapt. New tools are coming out. So our hunch tends to be it's going to keep going up. It's just how quickly or otherwise. And then the last one is accelerating investment to get to some sort of base level of security, maturity, allow an organization to increase or slow spend from that point forward. So again, not a lot of good data for this. So generally, in summary, not appear to be a consistent, reliable standards that enable business leaders to make informed decisions on the right security investments. I'll pause there. Any questions?
I would almost wonder about I would almost wonder in terms of the cost leveling. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you'd implement something, there'd be a large portion of it that would be completely professional services.
Yeah.
Something that wasn't part of the capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Now it's all getting bundled in. So I don't know where you'd see the decrease, like the normal trend to see something normalize.
Yeah.
I think it would go flat or continuously increase, because I know my vendors every year here's a 1% to 3% increase in cost.
Yeah. Well, your vendors are increasing, and the technology is changing so rapidly that, and I'm doing some, operating model design right now for one of our clients, and we're doing a 2 to 3 year financial forecast, and they're banking a lot on automation, and I'm like, nah, I don't know. We haven't seen it. We've seen you degrade capabilities if you want to pull back spending, but we haven't seen you able to preserve the same capabilities or increase them if you're decreasing budget. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's a challenge, and you're right. So, it tends to be everything inflating at the moment, and that drives it up as well. Any other questions? Okay. So, what to do in absence of something that says, hey, we should spend 10 or 15% on cybersecurity as a percentage of IT or tech spend. So we just kind of, we have, obviously several recommendations, pull together a handful to share today. So this first one is, we call it race to base. So it's basically sprinting to get to a baseline set of capabilities at a reasonable level of maturity and cost. And so we'll emphasize that businesses have to make hard choices between spending more on security versus spending more on growing the business. We like the maturity modeling for at least a couple reasons. If done well, one, it shows you really easily, hey, these are where your weak points are. So I'm sure everybody will recognize these security domains at the bottom. Also shows maybe where you're doing well. So you can direct your investment a little bit more surgically. And then you can also use this to have a conversation with the business based on their risk tolerance. Well, where do you want to be over some period of time? So, hey, we want to try to get to, an average of 2 out of 3. I think this is adapted from C2M2, Department of Energy, in terms of the scale. Have a conversation with the organization about, hey, we're trying to get to this base level across these domains, and that's going to inform our roadmap, and then that roadmap is going to inform how much it's going to cost us, not just in this annual planning cycle, but over the next 2 to 3 years.
I think you're getting a really good deal on your log storage. The bar's a lot higher.
I imagine. So here's another interesting one too, and I think there was actually a session yesterday talking about better marketing security internally. So we call it selling the investment in security. And so what's interesting, as CISOs and their leadership team are pulling together their business cases and their business plan for the next upcoming year, what tends to happen when it gets up to leaders where they've got to make a decision on let's call it a $30 million budget or a $90 million budget, it all ends up being the same story. Hey, the reason we got to go do all this stuff is we need to meet our regulatory legal obligations, got to protect sensitive data and IP, got to protect customers, got to maintain business continuity, we got to preserve brand trust. And what we see is that leadership outside of security is like, well, that's the same value proposition you gave me a year ago, and the year before that, and the year before that. And it's very hard to distinguish, hey, we really need to invest in attack surface management versus identity and access management versus red teaming. Like to the lay outside of security, they're like, hey, you keep coming back every year and asking for more and more and more. And so what we like to do, and I've overly simplified this at least for today, is to show, listen, we have a base set of capabilities. So, I think one of the conversations we've had a lot is how many companies have been breached and also been SOC 2 compliant? Probably batting 1,000 on that. And so it's like, yeah, we might be compliant, with obligations on regulations, but we know that compliance isn't resilience, and so we might be at the lower rung of maturity, and we've got a lot of gaps across our attack surface, and that attack surface or protect surface of data systems, assets, people, it's pretty large, and it's often growing in organizations. So as you move up the maturity ladder, you start to chip away at those gaps. You start to fill them. So never fully filling them, but at least starting to tell the story of, hey, all of these incremental investments, they ultimately culminate, in kind of our North Star, our mission in terms of value proposition, but you have to keep investing and scaling those capabilities. And then the third one, and it's interesting, we tend to see, most security organizations, how many people are engineers in here? Mostly engineers. So most of cybersecurity is going to be engineers, developers, architects, operators. So maybe with the exception of the GRC function. So what they aren't are financial people. And so, but yet the cybersecurity organization has to negotiate oftentimes with finance to come up with their business case. And so one of the things that we recommend is, hey, invest a little bit in a good, strong BizOps and FinOps function. So have people within the cybersecurity organization that know cybersecurity, and they also know how to crunch the numbers and work with finance. So essentially bridge the gap between those two, because it is a constant fight to battle for money to invest in cybersecurity. Also, those finance folks, they're often better at cost-benefit modeling. So we've witnessed often, and perhaps you have as well, the cost tends to get underestimated and the benefits overestimated. And what that does, you continue to have to go back to the business, go back to the well, and ask for money for the same initiative. So again, you start to lose confidence that you're good stewards of security investment. And then that's the last one, third. Having a strong FinOps function helps demonstrate to the business that, hey, we're making smart investments on cybersecurity, ultimately trying to reach that North Star of protecting everything we have, the people we have, data, and so on. And then just quickly in closing, just going back to the spending benchmarks. So of course, it's not uncommon for companies to want to do this, to at least have a baseline with which to compare themselves. However, when it comes to cybersecurity and their mission of protecting the organization, it's just not working. Treat these benchmarks with careful scrutiny and a healthy dose of skepticism. That's all I got. Told you I'd keep it quick. Any questions?
I've got a quick one.
Yeah.
With all of the companies that you're working with, if you're looking at 4 to 17% benchmarks,
Yeah.
is there a particular type that you say always spends higher?
I think what is complicating about this as well, where are they in the journey? So, some of our clients are Fortune 500 companies.
That'd be my follow-up.
Yeah. So, I mean, they have a ton of capabilities already. And so their decision around how much they suspend is completely different than, other companies. So we work for some what I'll call large mid-market. So these are companies that are just starting to get into the billions, right? So maybe they moved quickly through the startup phase, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we've really got to shore up our cybersecurity safeguards. And for them, a lot of times, now they're going in and they may have spent 10 million on security, 15 million, and now it's like, hey, we're asking for double. So we need 30 to 40, because when you go back to that one slide on maturity analysis, they start to bring in some of the big consultancies to come in and do those maturity analyses and realize they've just got holes everywhere. And so it's a shock to the business owners to be like, we really need to spend this much on cybersecurity. And often what we say, kind of behind the scenes, is like, and that's not even close. So you're just starting the journey and how much you're going to spend on this. So to answer your question, it really depends on where the organization is in their current maturity. Yeah.
A few slides back, you had I think we were showing the different practice areas.
Yeah.
I think go back a few more. Here, these here. And the thing that popped in my mind when you're on this slide was any type of cross-cutting mapping or model about the risk in each of the areas based on the industry group you're in, because
Yep.
the baselines can be helpful.
Yeah.
Like, my group works in oil and gas and energy.
Yep.
There's certain areas that we will invest more in.
Totally.
Based on certain risk dimensions.
Yep.
Are you seeing any models like that starting to pop or form, or
Yeah,
good data,
certainly.
good data sources that we can look at?
Yeah, I don't know about good data sources, but I know when I showed the continuum early on, so where it's like you're starting to become more surgical. So oftentimes we'll do, like, I think it's common, the crown jewels analysis. And so maybe
I'm looking earlier in this year, because that's how I kind of looked at how I picked where my investment areas would be.
Yeah.
There's always a core table stakes
Yeah.
in that 1 and 2.
yeah. If you're,
Risk dimensions that help inform that bridge between 2 and 3, or even
Yeah.
the cusp of 1 and 2, where you should be putting more of your time.
yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is just generally what we observe as the organization goes through this. They tend to start with maturity, but if you can jump right to risk-based, where you're being very surgical about, hey, there are certain things, not everything that you're protecting is created equal. And so, hey, if you can throw more dollars at, protecting pipelines or, whatever the business is, we're going to index heavily on investing there. But yeah, we're going to take some risks on things that are lower value. And so that tends to be the risk-based approach. But we find that often comes after just trying to chip away whole hog at each maturity dimension. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't want to hold everybody up here. Good. Appreciate it. Thank you.